Okay, my name is Ornelas. My grandson's been hearing a lot of little stories from me of my past, and he was wondering if we could share them. And I said, well, maybe so. So he set this little video up, and so I'm going to try and relay a story that happened to me when I was young, maybe about 13 or 14 years old. My dad had taken us down to Juarez, Mexico, and we were staying in a hotel room, myself and my sisters and my mom. And my dad came back to the hotel room and said, Albert, you've always been interested in cowboys and stuff like that. And he says, I met a man who's very famous, and I want you to meet him. His name is Manuel Juarez. I said, what'd he do? And he said, well, he's very famous. They have a song about him in Spanish, the bravest man in Mexico. I said, well, okay. So we went down to where Manuel Juarez lived, up higher on the street on the side of the hill there in Juarez. We met this man. He wasn't a very big man. He was kind of lanky and spoke Spanish. We went in his house. My dad had taken a six-pack of beer, and the man was talking to my dad in Spanish, and he kind of said, yeah, everybody wants to buy me a beer, but hardly anybody gives me money for food, he says, but your dad has offered me food and to talk to you and tell you my story. And I tell this story very often, he said, now, he says, just, I make a little money off of this, but hardly any. He says, but I'm going to tell you the story. And he says, most of the people that want to hear these stories are people who haven't lived very much in life like your dad. And he made me mad. And I started to stand up, and my dad grabbed my shoulder and he said, don't do that. Here in Mexico, you can get killed for standing up against a man like that. That's the way he makes his living, fighting, because he's got to defend his honor. And the man laughed and he said, I better tell you this story because it's liable to save your life. He said, we lived down in Mexico in Chihuahua, this side Chihuahua. He said, my dad, Manuel Juarez's dad, had a little ranch, and he said, we had school. We used to go to school, and I met a girl there, and we got married, and my dad's ranch was empty because he had moved to town because he couldn't hardly do anything at the ranch. He said, but he had some horses. He said, real beautiful horses. He had paints, and he had black ones and white ones. He said, and so as a living, I didn't have to work too much. He said, but we had goats and chickens, cow, and the little ranch was so fertile. He says, the grass was up over your ankles, and the horses, we could just turn them loose in the corrals. And he said, I would grow them when they were little babies, and not just whistle them, they'd come running. He says, and as we had 2 kids, and we were sending them to school, and they had these trees, had a lot of long branches, and the branches would drape over and leave like tents under the trees, he says. And I would be over there making like I was working, chasing the horses around, and my wife would bring a lunch, and we used to spend the afternoon out there by the creek, and and we'd pass the time under the trees. He says it was so beautiful. He says everything was so bright, so new. He says, and I used to gamble a little bit, but mostly what I wanted to do was sell the horses. He says, and I grew two of them good enough to sell, and they were beautiful horses. He says, and I hardly ever went to town. We just had everything we needed, except then my mom and dad lived in town, but I took two of the horses up to Chihuahua. He says, and they were having a big fair down there, and they had horse races and stuff. He said, I didn't have any trouble selling them at the top price. He says, oh, I felt like I was a rich man. He says, I was so happy. He says, and I was by myself within Chihuahua and had a few drinks. He says, then he says, I went looking around, and he says, I found this store that sold clothes for charros, he says. So I bought myself a charro outfit. He says black and a black hat with some embroidery. He says they made it fit and everything. It fitted to me and everything. He says, and I bought my boots, He says I got carried away, and I was looking around, and I found this pistol, and it was so nice. It had a white handle, and it was nickel plated. He says, so I bought it too with the holster. He says, and I packed up everything, and I went home, and and I took my wife shopping, and he says we were so happy, we had everything. He said my wife was so beautiful. He said, but later on there was a fiesta in town, and she wanted to go, I wanted to go, so we left the kids. We told the kids we'd leave them with my mom and dad, and they had already taken them over to their house. So I got some horses ready. I got the best horse that I had for myself, and I got her a real beautiful mare to ride, and I saddled them up, and we felt like rich people going down the road, all dressed up and everything. And he said when we were getting to the fiesta in town, he says the streets had been fixed up and had lights and stuff were ready for the nighttime. It was the daytime. He said, and when we pulled into an area, there was trees around and men standing around, and they said, take your horses and put them over there. And as we were riding by, one of the men said something about the back of the horse my wife was riding. Something like, what a beautiful bottom on that one. It was a lot coarser than that, what he said. He said, and it made me mad, and I wheeled a horse around trying to scare him. I was going to go scare him, but he said I had taken a gun. I had never taken a gun to town. He said I knew how to shoot. He said I'd practiced a lot. I wasn't going to take it. He said, but it looked so good with the charro suit. He said that I had taken it for that. But when the man came at me, and he went for his gun, and he pulled out his gun and he shot at me, and he missed. He said I shot him. He went down, and everybody crowded around me, and they knocked me off the horse. They took the gun away from me. And next thing I know, I was in handcuffs, and they were taking me off to jail. He said I never should have taken it that way, that insult. I shouldn't have listened to him. He had done it before to other people. He said the man was hurt in his head. He was wearing a cowboy suit, and the gun in his head was just a .22, that probably his mom had bought him, He was in a wheelchair, and stood up when he shot at me. He said that it was bad because the man was also the son of one of the sheriffs. He said the sheriff had been there a long time, and they had about 3 different deputies and sheriffs. And he wanted me hung on the spot, you know. And they said, well, no, he had shot first. Everybody said he had shot first. So they couldn't hang me, but he wanted justice, you know. And so they put me in jail. He said my wife, she had to get a lawyer, and so she started selling off the horses that we had. We had quite a few. As time went by, after a couple of years, her and the lawyer, she had been going to the lawyer and the lawyer and the lawyer. She wound up marrying the lawyer. He divorced his wife and married my wife and took over my kids. He said, I don't know, I don't think I deserved all that. But he says, I have another wife now, he says, and I have a child, but he says, it was something that I want you to know that it was a mistake. I made a mistake. I took it too serious at the wrong time, and it cost me. He says, I want you to know that when you get told off or you get picked on, most of the time it's for jealousy. They're jealous of you. But remember, when you jump back at them, remember that you have a lot to lose, and probably more than they have. He says, they finally turned me loose, you know, after about 5 years. He said, but I couldn't go back. They had already sold the ranch and everything. I think they divided everything among themselves, you know, because they were in all legal here and legal there. But I've used that a lot of times, you know. I think, well, is it really worth it to open? What I really think is that, you know, everybody should watch out that they're not prodded into different fights or something that's going to take you that step further. Remember what you have to lose, you know, when you go to push around somebody, because they might not be all there. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Grandpa.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Ornelas. I've been talking to my grandson and telling him stories, and he's been liking them so much, and I said, well, maybe we can just record some, you know, and he said, I can do that. So if he can show these stories, it might help people in a time of trouble, you know. Not only this story, but if possible, we'll record some more. But I hope that this story will be in your background for when the time arises. Thank you.